So it's day 7 of the quarantine, and I've had my first cabin fever run-in with a neighbor. And I think I finally figured out why I got so many fines over the year for what the HOA termed my poorly trimmed tree. When I left the house just before 5 o'clock today to go pick up some dinner, and found out that the guy who owns the rental that's next door to me had his truck parked blocking my driveway and wanted to, and when he saw me, he said, "Oh, hey, I need to talk to you," and essentially demanded that I trim it properly because he doesn't want the tree on his property. I asked him to show me what was wrong, and he took me over and he said, "It's on my property." And I said, "Where?" "It's not on your property." And he said, "Well, it's hanging over." And I'm like, "But that's not your property. None of the tree is on your property." And he insists that, well, that's how he defines it. I'm guessing that all the fines that I accumulated over the years originated from his complaints. The great irony is that he doesn't even live in the house. And although I also have bushes that are, slightly extended over the property line, he didn't make any bones about that, just the tree. And he told me if I don't trim it, presumably to his satisfaction, that he will. Well, I got immediately on the phone with my parents. My mother retired from government service last year to ask them if they had any ideas, any knowledge of any legal stipulations. And she went through some of the guidelines and couldn't find anything that specified any situation that fit my circumstances. In other words, the county hasn't set any guidelines for how trees should be trimmed on your private property, unless, of course, it impedes with public property, sidewalks, easements, the street, etc., which makes sense. And I know the HOA rules say that they will be well trimmed, which is appropriately vague, so that he can construe it the way that fits his satisfaction. So we couldn't find anything. While I was on the phone with them, the guy's daughter came over and confronted me, even though she has no legal rights to even get involved in this because she doesn't own the house, and insisted that the reason why her father was upset is because branches from the tree were touching the house. Well, I went over and looked, and I checked, and none of them are touching the roof. So I now have yet another piece of evidence that this is just because they don't like the tree. Both of them were confrontational and belligerent, and both of them insisted that I needed to calm down. I did tell the guy, though, to be honest, that if he trimmed the tree, which is my private property, that we would have a problem. So he used some logical fallacies in his approach. He pointed out there's a branch that I trimmed and said, "Well, you trimmed this one." And I said, "Yeah, I only trimmed that one because the HOA insisted that it needed to be trimmed, and this one, if it was still there, would be about neck height on me, and so it would have grown across and impeded the passageway. So I trimmed all the lower stuff and let the tree grow up higher." Then he claimed that because the branches are in the air over his property, that they are on his property. I told him he doesn't own the airspace, and he says, "So who does?" And I said, "Well, not you, maybe the FAA." And then he talked about how much the trees litter and insisted that he had spent some time cleaning it up. Well, I know I'm over there periodically because I've weeded on that strip that's actually his property before, and I know that there's not a lot of litter on his property, and that they don't litter a lot. These are just deflections to say, "I just don't like the tree." And if that's his business, he just doesn't like the tree, well, you know what? Suck it up, shmoo. So, some nerve. So I took pictures of what the tree looks like now because I expect that he will let it sit for a certain amount of time, which will not be very long because everybody's on simmer right now. And then if it doesn't meet his expectations, he's just going to come over and trim the tree. And I know if he does that, he'll probably cut it right up the property line, which will not be healthy for the tree, which will make it look like an eyesore, and which will annoy me because I would be the only person in the neighborhood that this has happened to. Because I walked around the block after he left, before I called my parents, and I looked, and there are tons of trees across the property line, including the one in his front yard that grows over. I mean, it doesn't impede anything, and his neighbor is probably not making bones about it. But I even checked. The tree I have next door is about a foot away from the window in my other bedroom. So I'll probably go out and trim that, but I'm not going to go make a big stink. Number one, because the bank owns that other house, and they're not going to do anything. But I'm just going to trim what's annoying and leave it be. And even if somebody lived there, they probably wouldn't even notice. And I know Jeff wouldn't have cared. He would have been like, oh, sorry, I didn't even think about it, because he didn't think about it because he didn't think about anybody. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over tomorrow, and I'm going to trim any of the limbs that might, come anywhere close to touching his house if the wind blows, and any branches that may hang down into the way so that you can walk underneath there and have a 6-foot clearance on that side. Then I will go to him and explain what I did and why, that I've looked at the literature that's available online and come to that accommodation, and now that I'm waiting until I receive further direction from government officials before I act. Until then, I ask him to be patient and leave the tree be. I have never had a positive interaction with this guy, and I'm so ticked off that I'm molting. I'm also ticked off that his daughter had the audacity to jump in and get involved. Like, he didn't already handle it, and she's got to handle it herself. I don't understand what's going on. I know that the tempers are flared, but this is a long-standing problem that I guess is just simmering up because they have nothing better to do because nobody's at work except bellyache about minor things. So it's interesting that this is my first problematic interaction. It's also interesting that I've never had a positive experience with this family. Just to run down the laundry list. So in addition to the fines for this tree, which I think originated with them, I've had the following interactions. One night I was walking the dog, and between his house and the neighbor, there's one of those utility boxes for the telephone, and my dog was sniffing it because I'm guessing dogs pee on it, and he peed on it too. And the wife said, keep your dog out of my yard. And I said, well, I'm going to clean up after him if he poops. And I realized she actually meant literally that. I don't want your dog in my yard at all. What was really funny about the dog is at the time he was deaf, and I think he knew that because when we would walk by the house, he would walk on the curb. Like he knew he wasn't supposed to be in their yard and was, I'm not in your yard, because that's what kids do. So it was actually kind of funny he did that. Oh, the guy also claimed, that I'd come over to his house once and banged on the door. And I said, dude, I have never been to your house and I have never touched your door. And then he dropped that. So I think he's had other bad interactions. The other bad interaction I had was also with his wife when she was the president of the HOA, and there were the previous renters. She caught me in the street one night and said that they had scorpion problem in the house because I have bushes in my yard and that the scorpions were under my bushes. And I asked her, do you have proof that the scorpions are in my yard? And she said no. I said, good, because my next question was going to be, what are you doing trespassing in my property going through my bushes? So there's always been this sort of adversarial relationship between us. It's just this circumstance, I think, has brought it to a boil where they're now willing to do things they otherwise wouldn't do. But I'm expecting that if I don't take action in a certain amount of time, that he's just going to go do it. And then I'm going to have to be the bad neighbor. And I told my dad, I said, I'm tempted to go trim it because I don't want him to trim it and dork it up. Because that's exactly what he'll do, because it's not his tree and he doesn't care. I also don't understand, it's not his, he technically owns the house, but he doesn't live in it. So what is the big deal? I don't know. Some people I just don't understand. And, the false dichotomies working under that you either trim the bush to my stipulations or I'll do it myself. I don't get it, because he doesn't have the authority to do this, I think, to trim a tree that's my private property unless it's actually impeding the house, and it isn't. And that isn't the argument that he made. He just, wants it trimmed to the property line, which that won't look stupid at all, right? If there's a tree with a perfectly flat side, because that's what trees look like, right? Anyway, that's my current conundrum with this neighbor, and it's interesting to see how things are developing in the, what are they calling this? The quarantine of 2020, I guess. So anyway, that's my day. That's basically the only thing eventful that happened today besides the few work things that went back and forth. But it's interesting to see what's actually coming to the surface when people have nothing better to do with their time. I hope things are better where you are. I hope you're healthy. I hope your neighbors are leaving you be. And that when you have interactions with people that they're positive, because so far that's not my experience. And if it is for you, great. If you're not having good times, I feel sorry for you. I wish you Godspeed and good luck. And if there's something I can do to help you, let me know. Even if it's just sending you a message, because time I've got, like everybody, right? In times like this, it's wise to think about the words of the founding fathers that we must hang together, or assuredly we will hang separately. So let's hang together and take care of yourselves and each other. Godspeed and good night.